And it goes something like this. Well, Father, all that religion stuff is nice, but really, I just want my kid to get a good SAT score. Jesus is a mascot, but it's not the important work. And honestly, that's not what I'm paying for.
I think that's probably the vast majority of parents sending their kids to Catholic schools across the country. The response over time has to be, Jesus isn't just a mascot. Jesus is the unum necessarium. He's the one thing necessary.
Praise be Jesus Christ. This is Father Robert McTague of the Society of Jesus, your daily host for the Catholic Current, where we bring Christ to the world and the world to Christ. You're listening to us from the station of the Cross Studio, your local radio station and the iCatholic Radio mobile app, where we proclaim the fullness of truth with clarity and charity. As always, let's start with prayer. In the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. Almighty God, through the intercession of St. Ignatius Loyola, we ask that you pour forth your Holy Spirit upon us, a spirit of discernment that may hear your voice and obey your command. In the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. Well, for instance, the beginning of the COVID interruption, what I've also called COVID tide, we've been told to trust the science, as if the science were a univocal reality. And we've been told really to trust the experts. And the cult of the expert and the rise of the celebrity expert concerns me. Let's take that from the public forum and put it in the church forum. There's very often been a sense of, well, just trust the catechists. Just drop your kid off at Sunday school and do nothing else. And then miraculously, your kid's going to practice the faith, get married in the church, give you Catholic grandchildren. Just trust the catechists. Just trust the process. Evidence shows that that's not working. Outsourcing catechesis of our children is a bad idea. Let me talk about that today. My guest is Director of Undergraduate Studies at McGrath Institute for Church Life. He's Academic Director for Notre Dame Vision, and he has a teaching appointment in the Department of Theology at the University of Notre Dame. Leonard DeLorenzo, welcome to the Catholic Current.
Thank you for welcoming me.
Leonard, I think back to when I first started teaching Sunday school many, many years ago. I was 15 or 16 years old, and I was teaching third grade, and the first little girl comes into the classroom, says to me, "Oh, I'm really looking forward to being confirmed." I said, "Oh, why is that?" She said, "Because then Mommy said I don't have to go to church anymore."
Right.
And that was over 40 years ago. But things have gotten better, right?
Oh, you know that's not true, which is why you asked that question.
Yeah. Yes, I was using rhetoric. You found me out.
And I think that the young people have that feeling deep within them that, gosh, I just can't wait to be done with this. But I think also the parents, because as a parent myself, I've had this feeling, oh, it's one more thing to do, one more oftentimes drop off, one more pickup. It's happening oftentimes on Sundays, or maybe it's on a Wednesday night. And, especially now right at the beginning of fall, when the school year starts, I think every parent is feeling the whole schedule of things that start to come back in and all the places you have to be simultaneously. And honestly, I think the catechetical formation of our children often falls in line with just one more thing to do.
Right. Right. And, I think back, I'm going to be referring to station wagons, so this goes back to the 70s.
Sure.
I'd be looking at the school window, and lines of station wagons would come up, and Mom would be in her bathrobe and slippers and house coat, and she would just be shoving the kids out of the car and then roaring off. And I said, your kids aren't brain dead. What do you think they're going to conclude? And I think of a close friend who taught First Communion and First Confession for several years, really tried her best. And her husband said, "You can't do it anymore because I'm just tired of listening to you complain at the dinner table of how utterly disengaged parents are." You've got 7-year-old kids who don't know how to make the sign of the cross. They'd say, "Well, I know you're supposed to have a confession practice at this time, but we've got soccer practice. Can we arrange something separate?" As if somehow this catechist was the catechetical concierge, that you were hiring her like you were hiring a caterer for a wedding. Is consumerism, is faith and the faith experience in the church just one more product? Does it become that?
I think there's some evidence of that we've taken a consumeristic approach to the religious education or formation of our young people. I remember those station wagons well that you're talking of. We had a Datsun station wagon when I was a child, and now they've just been replaced by Honda Odysseys and Toyota Siennas, but it's the same right. sort of reality. And I think it's very easy, and I've probably fallen into this myself at times, to blame parents, that parents are just doing the wrong thing. They have turned it into a sort of consumer model of religious formation because we're the ones that are dropping off and picking up, and that's all that we expect. As I've become a parent, and my oldest children now are teenagers, I know that it's very difficult to be a parent and to find a different kind of mold to get into. In some ways, the whole system has been designed to elicit and then meet a consumer desire. Like you said at the beginning, children expect nothing more than to hopefully be done with their religious education. So there's one fewer thing to do. And parents have that same feeling. So I think one of the really challenging, maybe the most challenging part of all this and finding something new is that we have to identify the right kind of sacrifices and costs to make in order to build a new kind of model. I think if we just look for, well, here's the program that'll do it for us, here's the textbook that'll work for us, what we've done is we've just exchanged one consumer product for another.
Right.
And in some ways, the mold has to be reformed, first broken and then reformed, if we're going to expect anything different out of our catechetical approaches.
Friends, I'm speaking with Dr. Leonard DeLorenzo. He is with the McGrath Institute for Church Life. We're talking about outsourcing the catechesis of our children. One of my pet peeves, and I've got quite the menagerie, I can assure you, one of my pet peeves is the disaster known as the sacrament of confirmation. I had a friend who, 2 or 3 years, really gave his all to teach confirmation properly to kids in junior high school. And every year it was confirmation as graduation. Kids would disappear the Sunday after being confirmed in the faith, and the DRE would shrug her shoulders and say, well, you can't force them. I said, no, you can't force them. Can you attract them? And what I noticed every year was while these kids would disappear, the pastor wouldn't offer to resign. He wouldn't, the DRE wouldn't offer to resign. No one wrote a letter of apology to the bishop. The parish didn't declare a period of prayer and fasting and penance. It was just business as usual because somehow the clunky old machine would just keep rolling forward through kind of an inertia or cultural momentum. But that rolling forward momentum, that's gone now. I mean, it was gone before the COVID interruption. Now, demographically, financially, there's no steam left in the engine. Is my perception correct?
I suppose that is correct. And I think, in talking, as you put, the disaster of the sacrament of confirmation, we've created it into a sacrament of inconvenience. It's one thing that one more thing that we have to do, whereas it's supposed to be a sacrament, the completion of the sacraments of initiation, at least as most people encounter the sacraments after First Communion. But to complete that initiation, I think it ought to be the completion of building a foundation for a truly Catholic life. And I think the thing that is missing most of all is a sense of mission, that those who are being confirmed are being infused with, entrusted with, challenged by the Catholic mission. That is the mission of the Church. So the way that I've tried to, I suppose, recast the approach to the sacramental preparation for confirmation is to think of especially the young people as being formed into what I call sources of goodness. So in other words, if baptism is the reception of the good gift of God's life to us, we're immersed in it, it begins in us and we begin in that. Then by confirmation, we are being transformed to become a source of that life for others, which is going to come through. It has to come through in a life of prayer, in a life of charitable activity, in the participation and extension of the sacraments. And ironically, we think that if we ask for less from our young people or from those who are being initiated into the faith, then we'll get what we're asking for. But it's actually quite the opposite.
Right.
We have to ask for more. They actually respond to being challenged. And this happens in all forms of life with young people. We have the wrong idea about it. So I think to kind of turn that disaster into something else where the stars are actually aligned and not misaligned, we have to re-infuse the sacrament with this sense of mission, that it becomes the personal mission of those who are becoming mature Catholics to extend the work of Christ in the world. And not in any kind of fantasy type way, but in real ways where it's a sacrifice within their own lives.
I think of the Mormons, and as you can imagine, I have a lot of trouble with Mormon theology and et cetera. But, their boys spend their entire high school experience raising money to support themselves for a 2-year mission trip. You can't fake that.
Right.
Yeah. So
That's right.
there is something that they're doing that we're not doing. And I like the idea, if only we ask less, we'll get more. I think part of the problem, one of the reasons why we don't ask more of them, and we can talk about that after the break, is that if I ask more, I'm going to have to show more myself. I'm going to have to show that it's worth the effort.
I think that's absolutely right. And you have to clear out the space to be able to give more, because in order to make that sacrifice more here in the Catholic life, something else is going to have to come off the table. There's only so much that's going to fit there. And that's what I think all of us have so much trouble with, is cutting out the other things, at least some other things, and prioritizing really well. But I like that you're pointing to the Mormon mission. I think they're really there's something about sort of human development that's written right into that. You actually have a period of entrusting these young people with the mission. It becomes their own. They work for it. They sacrifice for it. Mother Teresa had this very same insight with her missionaries when Malcolm Muggeridge was interviewing her.
Leonard, we're coming up on a hard break, but let's take up the thread of the conversation in the next segment. Friends, when we come back, we're going to continue our conversation with Dr. Leonard DeLorenzo, the McGrath Institute for Church Life. We're talking about the catechesis of our children, and I think we're doing it wrong. Remember, our rallying cry here at the Catholic Current is Christus Mundo, Mundus Christo, bringing Christ to the world and the world to Christ. We do it because our Lord says so, for the greater glory of God, the love of our neighbor, and the salvation of our own soul. After the broadcast today, go to thestationofthecross.com, get our resources list, download our audio as podcast. Let's do it together. We'll be right back. Stay with us. This is Jesuit Father Robert McTigg. Join me on Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern for a special doubleheader. We'll start with well-known canon lawyer and commentator Father Gerald Murray to talk about the new legislation restricting access to the traditional Latin Mass. Then we'll meet Cameron O'Hearn, who on Sunday will release the first of 3 documentaries called The Mass of the Ages. Learn about liturgy, law, and love on the Catholic Current this Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern, coming to you from the Station of the Cross and the iCatholic Radio mobile app.
You're listening to the Catholic Current with Father Robert McTigg from the Station of the Cross Catholic Media Network. Stay connected with the show, our guests, and topics by following the show on Twitter and Gab. Just search for The Catholic Current.
Praise be Jesus Christ. This is Father Robert McTigg of the Society of Jesus, your daily host for the Catholic Current, where we bring Christ to the world and the world to Christ. You're listening to us from the Station of the Cross Studios, your local radio station, and the iCatholic Radio mobile app, where we proclaim the fullness of truth with clarity and charity. My guest today is Dr. Leonard DeLorenzo. He's with the McGrath Institute for Church Life. We're talking about the bad idea of outsourcing the catechesis for our children. Leonard, in the last segment, we were talking about Mother Teresa and the wisdom of asking more rather than less. Fill us in on that, please.
Sure. So in her interviews with Malcolm Muggeridge asked her, Mother, I see that when these young women come to join your society, that you're asking them from so much right from the beginning. You don't start them off slow. You start them off in some ways in the deep end. And he couldn't see the wisdom in that. It seemed counterintuitive. And for her, in her sort of characteristic, clear way of speaking, she said, well, if I asked them for less, we wouldn't even get that. So we ask for more because they want to give more if you show it to them. There was a kind of understanding about the human heart that Mother Teresa had. And you're bringing this back to the Mormon missionaries. I think there's something of a common understanding there, too. You make it their challenge and their mission, and you'll get more. If you ask for less, you will get far less.
Right. And I also think this is really hard to do without good role models. And that's where I think here's the weak link in the chain is very often the parents aren't malicious and don't lack goodwill. They just don't have any knowledge or experience. They haven't had any proper catechesis themselves. I mean, I don't think we've got a lot of points on the board in terms of catechesis, at least in the West, for decades now. So we've got 1, 2, maybe 3 generations of parents who are lights out in terms of the faith. You can't give what you don't have. And that's kind of a head scratcher. How do we begin to address that?
Well, I think two things go together with that. In order to create or to form parents, let's say, to be the ones who are capable of passing on the faith well, we have to build them up in their competence. In other words, like you're saying, we have to help them to learn more, to know more, to become more articulate in the faith, to become better versed in the wisdom of Scripture, knowing how to read Scripture and to teach others how to read it, knowing the interconnection of Catholic doctrine and its connection to ways of life and prayer. And as we do that, we build up the competence. We also, at the same time, are building up the confidence to do it. Because I know this as a parent. I know this from my friends who are parents. We may want to give our children a better formation in the Catholic life to live fully as Christians, but we just don't feel like we can do it well. And so the easier thing to do, because we're not confident, is to give it over to someone who's been declared the professional, trusting that they'll be able to do what we cannot do. But the difference here with the Catholic life from, say, teaching our children musical instruments or becoming more expert in an athletic activity is that each of us, as fully initiated Catholics, as those who have been charged with this Christian way of life, is that it is actually our responsibility to form others in this way, to evangelize them and accompany them. And so I think the very first priority in all of this, when we think of our children, is actually the reinvestment of parents and of those who are growing into adulthood to practice the Catholic life more fully, to study regularly, to pray consistently and with others, to engage in the works of mercy, and to move from and back to the sacraments within the church as the building blocks of our lives.
I'm reminded of a conversation I had with a priest I've known for a long time who got himself in trouble with his bishop because he said, Bishop, when I read the Gospels, it seemed that Jesus played with children and taught adults, and we seem to be committed to doing the opposite. And I said, well, now we're not even committed to teaching children. And I see this also in different forms of campus ministry and youth ministry. As long as people are loud and excited, we're doing our job. And there's no substance. There's no there. And I think, too, since the COVID interruption, at least for a while, has begun to wane, the big question is, will they come back? Will they come back? But no one's saying who's going to go out and get them. And no one is asking, and what will they find if they do come back? Will it be insipid music, sweat-stained polyester vestments, banal preaching? It seems to me that what you're calling for is a thorough reconsideration of how we've been living together as Catholic communities. Am I reading you correctly?
You are. And I think, I've worked in, various realms of youth ministry or working with young adults now for a couple of decades. And I have found probably the easiest thing in the world to do, if you really wanted to do it, is to play upon and maybe even manipulate the emotions of high school students. You can give them a really good, exciting experience, but guess what? That's going to end. And as they grow and mature and everything else around them is asking for them to become more sophisticated or more learned, or is asking them to develop more expertise, if the form of Catholicism that we've given to them is not open to that, they're going to leave it behind because it seems irrelevant. It seems elementary. Right. I think, there's these trampoline parks like Sky Zone. If we want to continue to bring our children to Sky Zone when they're in their 20s and 30s, guess what? They're going to check out of that. They don't want to do that. And I think a lot of our religious education and youth ministry is like trying to recreate Sky Zone. We have to teach them and have as a focus how to be adults.
Right. Friends, I'm speaking with Dr. Leonard DeLorenzo. He's with the McGrath Institute for Church Life, and we're talking about the outsourcing of catechesis of our children and why that is a bad idea. Part of what concerns me is I think we don't know how to raise children to be faithful young adults, to be responsible family members, to know how to discern a religious or priestly vocation. We have this vague sense of checking the box. You put your butt in the pew on Sunday with the envelope in the basket, damn it, because this is for real, and then the end. That's it. We just check those boxes, and that's it. And everything just kind of hums along, and we're all just too busy doing things to ever evaluate what we're doing. Is it fair to say that we've been sleepwalking through church life for a long time now?
I think that's probably true, and I think that we sort of individualized church life where we reduce it simply to one family trying to do the Catholic thing. I think one of the really important things here is to build the communities in which people are formed together, not just where adults are forming young people, but actually the adults are actually involved in the formation of one another. We're practicing a Catholic life. The approach to at least confirmation preparation that I've been trying to develop is forming what I call Catholic formation groups, which includes the young people who are being formed for confirmation, but also sponsors and parents and other family members who are praying together, studying together, sharing faith together, engaging in the works of mercy together. Right. And I think that kind of environment and culture is what really, in the end, forms people. And we have to invest in that sort of thing. Because if it gets reduced just to the individual's intention or just to the single family's intention, we know that you're always sort of besieged by other influences and competing desires or demands, and it goes away.
Right. And I think there is that sense of we're all in it together, and we need to recover that rather than, oh, look, we're standing in line at the same 7-Eleven. In your article, you talk about the difference between Catholics who lapse and Catholics who disaffiliate. Can you unpack this for it, please?
Sure. This is just a sense I have, and it actually came in response to a question somebody asked in a seminar that we were running through our institute this summer. Is there a difference between lapsed Catholics and disaffiliated Catholics? And as I thought about that, I at least my sense was that there was in previous generations much more of the lapsed Catholic phenomenon. But for those people, they were deeply marked by and formed by a Catholic upbringing. And so you almost know a lapsed Catholic when you meet them because they have a certain understanding. They might speak in a certain way. There's certain concepts. So actually some of the most interesting and creative people I know as Catholics are actually lapsed Catholics. It's a really interesting phenomenon. But disaffiliation, I think, is something different. It's just a slipping away without any kind of grounding, without seeing anything here even worth rejecting. I think what we've come upon, especially with our younger generations, is that this is just not anything that demands my attention or time. They may even be mostly benign about the Catholic faith. They might not have any serious grievances. It's just not that important. And so it just kind of drifts away into the background. And in a way, I'd rather have the outright disagreement and rejection, because at least there's some kind of fervor there to deal with and a common understanding. It's the kind of benign drifting away that is more problematic because there's really nothing there to re-engage, or there's no regret in leaving anything.
Right. Well, as I think it's kind of a drift. It's kind of a vague memory, like, oh, Grandma had this recipe for Swedish meatballs, but we never, when I was a new priest and I was teaching at a self-identified Catholic university, if you ask a pre-med major, what's your major? He get this steely-eyed look and say, I'm a pre-med major. Or you say that to a nursing major, a PT major, the health science people, they were in it to win it. They were all the way in. And then you talk about religious affiliation and you get this glassy stare and say, Catholic, I guess.
Right.
Right. A Mormon who's on a 2-year mission to go ring in doorbells never says Mormon, I guess. Mm-hmm. So things have gone wrong. We're going to talk more in the next segment to talk about how to fix it. But where do you start? Is it? Did you feel it's kind of like a Rubik's Cube, or do you think there's an obvious place to start?
Well, the way I felt this for myself was actually with my oldest son, who was coming up to his year of confirmation preparation. And there was the invitation to do what everybody else had been doing for decades, which is to drop him off at our parish and then pick him up an hour and 15 minutes later every Sunday morning. He didn't want to do that. I didn't really want to do that. And so the place to start, I think, is saying, you know what? I want to seek out something different. But that, for me, meant I don't need to seek out somebody else different to outsource this work to, this responsibility. I have to take some responsibility and try and initiate something new. So I think that's the first place to start, is for those of us who want to find something else to actually invest in doing something else ourselves with others, maybe being the leader or maybe creating a small group that's going to take the primary responsibility in leadership. And I can talk more about that as we get into our next segment.
Right. And as I said, I think that mentality of checking the box, I think there was a time when we had a large enough cohort and a lot of cultural momentum just checking the box sort of kind of worked. I mean, my confirmation preparation when I was 11 years old, the primary element was I had to memorize 64 questions and answers from the Baltimore Catechism. And my teacher was telling me that I was being let off easy because when I was reciting the answers, I didn't have to inject the punctuation. Trying to kill two birds with one. And I have to say, I don't remember what most of the 64 questions are anymore. Granted, it was a long time ago. But yes, we certainly need to do better, which is what we're going to talk about in the next segment. Friends, we come back, going to continue my conversation with Dr. Leonard DeLorenzo. He's Director of Undergraduate Studies, McGrath Institute for Church Life. We're talking about outsourcing the catechesis of our children and why that's a bad idea. In the next segment, we're going to talk about conversion, always and for everyone. What does that mean? After the broadcast today, go to thestationofthecross.com, get our resources list, download our audio as podcast. Wherever you can find audio, you can find us. Don't just grab the audio, follow the channel, write a 5-star review. We need to attract the attention of the algorithms so these conversations get the attention they deserve. Everything you need to take this conversation to your family and friends, we give to you. Together, let's take it around the world. Back in 2 minutes. Stay with us.
This is the Catholic Current from the Station of the Cross Catholic Media Network. Catch up on an episode you've missed or share them with your family or friends. The Catholic Current is podcasted wherever you enjoy listening: Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, TuneIn, and the iCatholic Radio mobile app.
Praise be Jesus Christ. This is Father Robert McTague of the Society of Jesus, your daily host for the Catholic Current, where we bring Christ to the world and the world to Christ. You're listening to us from the Station of the Cross Studios, your local radio station, and the iCatholic Radio mobile app, where we proclaim the fullness of truth with clarity and charity. I'm speaking today with Dr. Leonard DeLorenzo, who's Director of Undergraduate Studies at the McGrath Institute for Church Life, and we're talking about outsourcing the catechesis of our children and why that's a bad idea. Leonard, some time ago, I read a very good book, which I recommend to everyone, by your friend John Horvat of Tradition, Family, and Property, and it's called Return to Order. And his diagnosis was brilliant, and then his prescription disheartened me because it required the cultivation of virtue. And I said, well, nobody wants to do that. It seems to me, in light of my own experience and research and reading what you've written, that what we need is large-scale conversion. And the fallen part of me says, well, that's not going to happen. What else is there? Isn't there some software program or an app we can get instead? How do we recover the individual responsibility and communal responsibility for conversion and initiation?
I think, many people, at least people like me, were always fascinated by that scene in the movie The Matrix where they plug Neo into the machine and within 15 seconds he knows Kung Fu.
Right.
And we want something like that. But to turn the conversation to virtue, what we're talking about are these perfected abilities. And to have a perfected ability to do the good, to desire the good and do the good, requires practice and repetition and continual work. Mm-hmm. We know this in other forms of life. We know this for musicians, expert musicians who never get beyond practicing their scales. They practice every day and they get better and better and better. We know this from athletes who go through spring training drills, at least baseball players, every year to hone their craft, to continue to get better. But we want something different, it seems, when it comes to the kinds of persons we are becoming, our character, that we want to just have it done and then move on. But to grow in virtue, this perfected ability, we have to continue to come back to these works, these practices. Right. And so what I think we need are communities, really small cultures within the households, within friend groups that are practicing these virtues together. And to practice those virtues, I think, means actually doing intentional things. I've probably mentioned at least a few times already, things like the works of mercy, that each of us at various times does not want to love our neighbor. We don't want to do those things that the other person needs. But by making within a community a commitment to engage in works of mercy together, we do the practice before we have the intention sometimes. Like we build up the affection for it by actually doing it. And I think if we examine our lives, we see that a lot of times our intention or our affections follow our habits rather than the other way around. That's the kind of thing I want to focus on, especially with religious education, religious formation, especially for young people. What are the right kinds of habits that we develop that even if the affections aren't there, even if the full intentions aren't there, over time, you develop a taste for it. It becomes, first of all, second nature. And then you couldn't even imagine any other way to be after you rehearsed it time and time again. Yeah.
Well, I think of our friends in 12-step programs like AA. They said,
Exactly.
you can't always think your way into right acting, which is painful for me as an intellectual and a philosopher to admit. He said, but you can act your way into right thinking. As we're talking about virtue, Aristotle says the virtuous man shows us what's possible. So again, we come back to the good role models. And which sadly I think we don't have a lot of, and that becomes a particular challenge. Also, I think that sense of you're not alone and we're all in this together. I think those are essential elements to communicate. So you talk about a Catholic formation group. What does that look like, and how does it avoid the trap of being just one more thing to do?
Right. Well, the Catholic formation group that I seek to form for especially these young people preparing for confirmation includes as the primary members those who are being formed, but also as important members of that group, the parents and other adults, other family members who are accompanying these young people. And the Catholic formation group, I think, really follows from what we see from the earliest Christian communities as reported in the Acts of the Apostles, specifically Acts chapter 2. They did certain things that marked their way of life. They broke bread together regularly. They engaged in the daily prayers. They shared all things in common. In other words, the needs of some became the needs of all, and the resources were shared among them. And they studied the teachings of the apostles. So from that, we see that study is an important part of the Catholic life. I think biblical study alongside the study of the doctrines of the faith, that sharing all things in common, engaging in the works of mercy, caring about the needs of each other in the group, but also the others in our community is a distinguishing mark of the Catholic way of life. Right. That engaging in the regular routine of prayers and then going from and back to sharing in the Eucharist together and extending that Eucharistic fellowship into the ways in which we talk with one another and share meals together. So the Catholic formation group is built on those pillars. We pray together. I want to initiate, especially the young people, into a habit of prayer journaling, to have an opportunity to reflect, but not just to reflect on themselves, to reflect in dialogue with the Lord, to engage in conversation with one another and adults over a meal, to incorporate into our regular meeting testimonials, especially about who is Jesus for me, to have very explicit and intentional lessons that move both biblically and narratively through the Catholic faith, and then to close it out with prayer that leads into the engagement of works of mercy. So the Catholic formation group in some ways is about content, but in another way, it's about patterns and habits of learning a way of life together.
What this reminds me of when I first got out of grad school and I was working, I was in Washington, D.C., and I had a lot of close friends from my college days, and we found that now that we were out of school, the campus ministry thing really wasn't for us. But we still wanted to grow in the faith together. So we would get together on Thursday nights. We'd pray over the upcoming Sunday scriptures. We'd go to Mass together. And after Mass, we'd go and have coffee and a bagel and talk about the homily and talk about what God was doing in our lives. And it was a real sense of Sabbath. So even if Mass was at 10 in the morning, we weren't going home till 3 in the afternoon because we spent the day reflecting on the things of God. And we did that for 7 years, and the group continued after I went to Jesuit Starfleet Academy. So that sense of we're all in this together, and it doesn't have to be terribly complicated, does it?
No, it doesn't. I've seen, signs of this or examples of this, say, in the Sant'Egidio community in Rome or in associations of communion and liberation. In some of my study of the life of the saints, especially more modern saints like Gianna Beretta Molla and her husband Pietro, they were involved in Catholic action. And Pietro said himself that the thing that saved him from the allure of fascism was actually the regular habit of getting together with his neighbors to pray to talk together, and then to engage in service. I mean, that is an astounding thing. He says the thing that saved him from the allure of fascism was that regular habit of doing this with others, of living a Catholic way of life. Like you're saying, it doesn't have to be a very difficult maybe it's difficult. It doesn't have to be a very elaborate sort of thing. It's basic commitments to a basic rhythm of life and doing it repeatedly with others that I think forms us with a certain kind of vision, with certain kinds of habits, and it elicits from us certain kinds of desires.
Right. Friends, I'm speaking with Dr. Leonard DeLorenzo. He's with the McGrath Institute for Church Life. We're talking about outsourcing the catechesis of our children and why that is a bad idea. So let's say, we need to do something different. Can you give us, and again, I don't want, what's the recipe for that? What's that 1, 2, 3, just click your heels 3 times and say Louis de Montfort and you'll be fine. Obviously that's not it. It's not a formula, but supposing, I had, say, 4 or 5 families, each has 2 or 3 kids in different ages. They're on the same page in terms of faith and morals, and they realize that good enough just isn't good enough anymore, if it ever has been, but it's certainly not now. And they say, okay, we got Thursday evenings open. Now what does that look like?
No, one of the principles I've come upon is that, let's say, Thursday is greater than June. What do I mean by that? That a weekly commitment is going to have a greater effect in the long run than one, deep and immersive commitment over the summer. Likewise, a daily commitment is going to have a deeper and more pervasive effect than a weekly commitment. So to your example, if you've got Thursday evenings, what do? I think, first of all, setting aside that time, which becomes sort of sacred time. It goes on the schedule first. It goes in ink. It's not, well, if we have time from week to week, we'll do this. No, it is really difficult to move that. Of course, there'll be exceptions, but you have to fight against, in other words, the temptation to move it. And if you have that time, then I think what are some of the keys? This is what I was trying to touch on a little while ago. I think to engage in a regular form of prayer together. Then I really like the practice of eating together and having focused, not frivolous conversation, meaningful conversation. Doesn't have to be boring, doesn't have to be dry, but meaningful conversation, not frivolous. To study something together. What I tend not to like is, and I see this a lot in my students and others say in parishes, which is we're going to have a Bible study. And what we'll do is we'll pick up the readings for the following weekend, and then we'll come together and say what we think about them. I don't know if that's really a good method, because what we end up doing, I think, is taking our opinions about things and just fitting it in to the scripture. I think that has to be directed in some way. Right. And so I think that is one of the places where we appeal to other resources. Maybe there are small programs that we can appeal to that can give us a trajectory for studying together. But studying together, I think, is part of that. And then I think extending that time in other kinds of engaged activities. And that's where I really think the actions and the works of mercy come into play. It may not happen on those Thursday nights, but once a month on a Saturday, or every 2 or 3 weeks, we're going to engage in something together or as family groups. I think that's really crucial and important.
Right. Whether it's praying the rosary outside of an abortion clinic or stocking food at a food pantry, to do something really hands-on is very important. I also think that tell me what you think about this, please. There's a value to marking the liturgical year, not just, it's Advent, let's get the candles out, or it's Christmas, let's decorate. But feast days, hey, let's go to Mass for the first Fridays and for first Saturdays. Let's all have a favorite saint day once a month.
Right.
How does that sound to you?
I love it. I think this is part of the genius of Catholicism, that we know, in some ways we know that you can't sustain the same level of investment or the same kind of investment all the time. And so we get these seasons where, say, for 4 weeks over Lent, or 4 weeks over Advent, or 6 weeks over Lent, we can engage in something for an intentional but limited amount of time, give our all to it, and then have a reset, find something else that we do communally over, say, Easter. And I like observing those seasons and having intentional, focused types of study or types of work that are part of that. The Church obviously more than recommends those to us in these liturgical seasons. But as you're also noting, these feast days, they become ways not just of marking time, but also of uplifting time, that we happen to fall into feeling that all of time is really basically the same. We're constantly just running from one thing to the other. The basic discipline of the Sabbath breaks that. It actually shows us that time is ordered to something. But we don't just get that idea. We learn it by doing it. Likewise, with the feast days in the church, all of our time is actually ordered to something, but we don't really get that message. It doesn't sink in unless we observe it. And I think, to appeal again to more modern saints, someone like the father of Therese of Lisieux, Louis Martin, he knew this. He was a timekeeper, a clockmaker, but the central gear of his life was, first of all, the Sabbath, and then the liturgical feasts of the church. He ordered his family life according to those feasts. And so time was not boring or flat for them. It actually had punctuations, and it was being drawn towards something.
I'm glad you mentioned Sabbath. That's one of my pet peeves. We can start the next segment with that. Friends, when we come back, we'll continue our conversation with Dr. Leonard DeLorenzo, who's with the McGrath Institute for Church Life. We're talking about outsourcing the catechesis of our children and why that's a bad idea. The next segment, we're going to talk about advice for parents and pastors. After the broadcast today, go to thestationofthecross.com, get our resources list, download our audio as podcast. Be part of the conversation. Follow what we're following by following us on Gab. That's gab.com. Our channel is The Catholic Current. Let's take this conversation around the world. We can do it together. We'll be right back. Stay with us. This is Jesuit Father Robert McTague, your daily host for the Catholic Current. Join me on Friday at 5 p.m. Eastern. We'll start with Let's Talk About This, just you and me working our way through a controversial issue. I'm going to ask, is the traditional Latin Mass good for priests? Then we'll wrap up with Weekend Readiness, where I'll review the headlines of the week in light of the upcoming Sunday scriptures so that you can be all prayed up for Sunday Mass. That's the Catholic Current on Friday at 5 p.m. Eastern, coming to you from the Station of the Cross and the iCatholic Radio mobile app.
After today's broadcast, go to the Catholic Current show page on thestationofthecross.com for info on today's guests, the show resource links, and to sign up for our weekly email of upcoming shows.
Praise be Jesus Christ. This is Father Robert McTague of the Society of Jesus, your daily host for the Catholic Current, where we bring Christ to the world and the world to Christ. You're listening to us from the Station of the Cross Studios, your local radio station, and the iCatholic Radio mobile app, where we proclaim the fullness of truth with clarity and charity. My guest today is Dr. Leonard DeLorenzo. He's with the McGrath Institute for Church Life. We're talking about outsourcing the catechesis of our children. Leonard, in the last segment, you mentioned Sabbath. I want to talk about that a bit. A few years ago, I wrote an article called Sabbath Without Anxiety. On the one hand, we don't want people to be so manic that, the stinking fish trash from last night's dinner we can't take out to Monday morning because Sabbath, and otherwise God will kill us. And we can't go to Walgreens to get batteries for Grandma's hearing aid because it's the Sabbath. Well, that's rather manic. But on the other hand, if Sunday is just get ready for Monday day, that's a great loss, too. How do we begin to recover a proper sense of Sabbath?
Yeah, I work with my students at Notre Dame on this a lot, which is a really, really hard thing for them to adapt and adopt because, as you're mentioning, Sunday has become the day of preparation for everything else in the week or the day of covering up everything that was not completed the week before. But I think the way we get started is you actually have to just block out that day first of all. Don't wait for everything else to fill the schedule. It comes from the primary discipline of saying this day is untouchable. And so you tell the work of the week, how long it has. You got 6 days. You don't get the 7th. And it actually starts, I think, from that very basic and simple commitment. But here's the thing that happens when you make that commitment. You start having to reassess what's a priority, what's important, when and how things get done otherwise. When I work with my students at Notre Dame, or say with high school students, or even when I look at my own schedule, there's a lot of just kind of like frivolous, undisciplined time. I say, or my students will say, I was working for 4 hours last night. No, you weren't. No. You were working for about 42 minutes. And then for 3 hours and 18 minutes, you were doing all kinds of other things that sort of had the appearance of work, but weren't. You were distracted.
Yeah, it's what I call multi-slacking rather than multitasking.
Multi-slacking. Yeah. I love it. Yeah. I think the Sabbath as a commandment it's an unbelievably beautiful and insightful human observation that we need this discipline to actually order our lives. We need to be ordered, first of all, to God and to devote a day to him and to praise and to the works of mercy to him, first of all. But that actually will put everything else in order. And unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, there are no shortcuts to that. We actually have to develop the virtues and the habits to do it. Right. So this is the kind of like hard truth for the high achieving students that I teach here at Notre Dame, of which I am a recovering member, that we have to just do this hard work of reorganizing our lives if we want to grow and to become really, truly human. Now, It's more challenging even when you have children because you don't always control their schedules. They're involved in things and other people are putting things on Sundays. And it becomes, every semester or every year, a challenging work between, say, my wife and myself and our children to decide what to do and what not to do, what time are we willing to give and what time is protected.
The idea of making time, and my brother-in-law had said, you don't make time, you kill something, and then you take that time from that corpse, and then you give it to the new thing, because there really are so many minutes and seconds in a day, and if you're spending it on one thing, you're not spending it on another. And I think very often, my work with university students, one of the reasons they scattered themselves at 92 different things, and they said, well, at least I tried really hard and I was ambitious. I said, but you never had to measure up to one thing. You never had to confront something and then at the end discover whether or not you succeeded or you failed. And I think there are people who take that same approach to Christian discipleship, that I'll kind of vaguely be scattered and committed and talk about how overextended I am, but I'll never own it to such an extent that I'll see with undeniable clarity whether or not I've succeeded or failed. Leonard, one of my favorite topics is to talk about preaching. I'm passionate about preaching. I've written about it many times, published a book on it. What is the role of preaching in this cultivation of community of disciples?
One of the thoughts I've had recently is that most of us are dissatisfied with preaching, and part of the reason is that we expect too much from preaching. Here's what I mean. That for most of us, at least those of us sitting in the pews, if we aren't studying the faith, reflecting on the faith, engaging in the works of faith the rest of the week, we're expecting for hopefully those 7 minutes, but sometimes upwards of 15 or 20 minutes, that homily to give us the spiritual sustenance that we need. Right. We're asking too much. We actually have to pull it back. And I have become... I've become more sympathetic to those who have to preach when they're looking out on a congregation, right? But when they're looking out at a congregation who has those unrealistic expectations that what you're going to give us in the next 10 minutes is going to fulfill the needs for everybody here.
Just from, I'm up on my soapbox here, please forgive me.
Yeah.
I think people expect too much. There are also people who expect absolutely nothing. And that they just turn to each other and say, well, that was useless, but at least it didn't cost very much. And there are times where, I've spent, for every minute preaching, I have spent an hour in preparation and study and prayer, and I'm pouring my heart out proclaiming Christ crucified. And there's some kid in the front row checking out the split ends on her hair. I don't think she's expecting too much.
I think that's probably right too. But
I'm sorry. I just needed to get that out.
And this is where I started before I had this little turn towards feeling more sympathetic, was that I think if we had more people who were preaching who did the kind of preparation you're talking about, that those of us who are listening to the preaching would perhaps have a better chance of being inclined to listen better. Right. And one of the things that I have found is that when the preaching always begins with or comes back to personal stories from the life of the preacher, I'm very quickly going to tune out, because especially if it's a pastor in a parish, like I'm going to know everything that you have in your life to preach about within the first year. And then after that, it's just kind of going back around the track. Right. Let's turn first of all to the scriptures. Use the stories to kind of bring the scriptures to life in some way or to demonstrate certain things. But let's study the scripture and have it proclaimed to us together. I've had some really great preachers in my parishes that have done that. I've had some bad ones that haven't done that. Right. So I think that for those of us, especially the lay faithful who are listening to preaching at least on at liturgies, that we have a responsibility to come prepared to be encountered by the Scriptures and to listen, and to spend some time reflecting on what we heard in the Scriptures and perhaps also from the homily afterwards. Mm-hmm. But I also think we have to do other things so we're not depending just on that one homily to give us what we need. And I think we have to find other ways of preaching in the church, whether it's the sharing of faith in smaller communities, whether it's crafting what I've called stories of grace and offering those together outside of the liturgical settings, so that we have many sources of sustenance and many sources of strength that are building up our spiritual lives together.
No, I think that is absolutely spot on, and I think people who are looking forward to Sunday, and they look forward to Sunday so much that they actually look at the Scripture readings ahead of time. Yes. And then reflect on them during the week. Whatever good that is offered in the homily will be magnified and fructified. And sadly, I don't think that's happening very much. Dr. Leonard DeLorenzo of the McGrath Institute for Church Life, thank you for your very good work and for a stimulating conversation. And I look forward to another conversation on the air sometime soon.
I would love that. Thank you for the opportunity.
I'm Jesuit Father Robert McTague, your host here every day here at the Catholic Current. Join us tomorrow for a really important episode. It's a doubleheader. We're going to welcome well-known Father Gerald Murray to discuss from the viewpoint of canon law the response to the recent motu proprio restricting access to the traditional Latin Mass. And then we're going to meet Cameron O'Hearn, a filmmaker who's going to tell us about a documentary series being released this weekend called The Mass of the Ages. You don't want to miss that. Through the intercession of Our Lady of Mount Carmel, may God our Lord surround you with a legion of guardian angels with flaming swords to light your path, to protect you from all harm and every evil, and to reach the happiness of heaven. May the blessing of Almighty God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit descend upon you and remain with you forever. Go in peace, and please pray for me.
Thank you for listening to this podcast brought to you by the stationofthecross.com, a listener-funded nonprofit organization. If this podcast has helped you in your spiritual journey, please prayerfully consider donating at thestationofthecross.com by calling 1-877-888-6279 or through our free iCatholic Radio mobile app.